Astonishing 14-0 surge from the hosts. Harper then finds Wembanyama for a layup while being fouled. The 22-year-old has a game-high 29 points, and San Antonio lead 103-102. Jalen Brunson sinks a trademark mid-range jumper to level it at 104. The 29-year-old is going to miss another, however, against Wembanyama, who grabs the rebound but then makes a terrible pass to Castle. Brunson steals the ball before being fouled by the Frenchman. He hits the go-ahead free throw with 9.5 seconds left and finishes with 20 points. The Spurs still have time. Wembanyama works off a screen but then misses the game winner. The Knicks win by 1 and become just the third team to win the first 2 road games of a finals after the 1993 Chicago Bulls and 1995 Houston Rockets, who both went on to win the title. Game 3 is in New York on Monday.
Lots of emotions of every type. I mean, not every type, only the negative type. But, yeah.
Wait for the title. Up next, CP World Today with 1 Live.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Holding gun. Word. Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Iran says it has struck U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain in retaliation for U.S. attacks on Iranian coastal radar sites. Russian President Vladimir Putin dismisses a potential meeting with the Ukrainian president as Kyiv accuses Moscow of choosing war over talks. The United Nations says violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo threatens efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak. And the International Space Station suffers another air leak caused by cracks in Russia's decades-old service module. Hello and welcome from Beijing. This is The World Today. I'm Wang Wang. U.S. Central Command says Iran has fired 7 ballistic missiles toward Kuwait and Bahrain. Kuwait says its air defenses intercepted the attacks, while Bahrain has also activated nationwide air raid sirens. Tehran says the attack is in retaliation for U.S. strikes on Iran's coastal surveillance radar sites. And Washington says it launched the attack after shooting down 4 Iranian drones that were launched toward the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Saeed Abbas Araghchi has rejected Lebanese President Joseph Aoun's claim that Tehran is using Lebanon as a bargaining chip for its negotiation with the United States. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports from Washington, D.C.
Iran on Friday said it fired missiles and drones to ward off U.S. battleships in the Gulf of Oman, the latest skirmish despite a ceasefire between the two sides. And the country's foreign minister undercut Trump's contention a day earlier that a deal is progressing.
For
the past few days, there has been no particular progress regarding issues related to negotiations. Both sides are, however, working on the texts that currently exist, and as soon as conditions are favorable, we will resume talks based on Iran's national interests.
For Iran, any deal is contingent on a permanent end to Israel's conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Their supposed ceasefire repeatedly rejected by Hezbollah as Israel launched airstrikes in southern Lebanon again on Friday.
This war will end only when it also ends in Lebanon. That is our clear position. This was our position regarding the ceasefire, and it remains our position regarding the end of the war.
On Thursday, Trump reiterated the main U.S. preconditions for a deal.
They can't have a nuclear weapon. The Strait will open immediately. It's going to open immediately.
The United Nations says it's doubling the amount of funding it needs to help Lebanon meet surging humanitarian needs as the war enters its fourth month. The UN is seeking an additional $331 million, bringing the total appeal to around $640 million. The increased funding is expected to help a quarter of Lebanon's entire population. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says Lebanon's humanitarian crisis is severe and continuously worsening. Ongoing conflicts have displaced nearly 1 million people, and more than 1.2 million are facing a severe food crisis. Prices of daily necessities there have soared. By the end of May, the UN Humanitarian Office had provided assistance to about 680,000 Lebanese people. Hamas has sent a delegation to Egypt for a new round of talks on the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Now, the group says it plans to discuss with Egyptian officials how the first phase of the truce agreement should be completed and how they can move to the second phase. Hamas says it is also seeking to stop what it calls repeated Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. An Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal has been in effect in the Gaza Strip since October 10th last year, and its first phase includes exchanges of detainees, entry of humanitarian aid, and the partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. In mid-January, the U.S. announced the launch of the proposed second phase, which should include the disarmament of Hamas, a full Israeli military withdrawal, and the establishment of a transitional governing body in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he doesn't see any reason to meet Ukraine's president for now, but remains open to negotiations. It comes after President Volodymyr Zelensky published an open letter calling for in-person talks with Putin. Our correspondent Dasha Chernichova reports from Moscow.
Russian president has admitted that he had a glance at this letter and he didn't go through the details of this letter. But most importantly, the Russian president said he sees no point in meeting with Zelensky at this stage. What he has been insisting on is that what Zelensky wants is not to find an end to this conflict, but instead to buy time. That has always been the position of the Russian side.
I said, there is no point in meeting. The only purpose for the Ukrainian side would be to stop the advance of our armed forces. That's all. And we need agreements, not for half a year or 3 months, but for a long historic perspective. Let experts work out some decisions, and after that it's possible to meet to attend the signing of some documents. But it's necessary to find a solution first.
The Russian president said that actually there was a trip that took place on the 21st of May when a Russian businessman traveled to Kyiv for a meeting with the Ukrainian president. And they had a conversation where Zelensky requested the face-to-face with Putin. But the very next day, Putin said the Ukrainian side has struck the college dormitory in the Lugansk People's Republic, the city of Starobilsk, which killed 21 minors. So the Russian president said, what's the point in meeting Zelensky? Well, the logic and the statements from the Ukrainian president are quite contradictory. He was also saying that there is no clear reason why Ukraine would not like to see Trump administration being the mediator in the negotiations or the guarantor of the peace between Russia and Ukraine. He has said that Ukraine wants to receive the weapons from the US but doesn't want Washington to become the guarantor, instead insisting on the European participation. So the Russian president has pretty much reassured once again that Moscow has all the capacity to continue this conflict by military means, even though it remains open for the negotiated solution. But having said that, we are seeing the repeated attacks taking place on both sides, which are claiming the lives of the civilian population. And the Russian president said that the best guarantee to make sure it doesn't happen is to continue the operation by military means.
Meanwhile, Zelensky has responded to the Russian leader's rejection by calling Putin's response weak.
Unfortunately, the Russian side has once again chosen war. Everyone heard today's response. A weak response. He simply doesn't want to end the war. I think many people around the world were disappointed by this response. He doesn't want to change anything and doesn't want to admit that his war appeals only to him and those who are making money off him. They were all smiling today. So there needs to be less money in Russia and more pressure on Russia.
Well, the two leaders last sat down together in 2019, 2 years before the start of the conflict. In his open letter, Zelensky says peace can only be achieved through direct engagement. Our correspondent Miki Mulin tells us more from Kyiv.
This was indeed the first public letter that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has written to the Russian President Vladimir Putin since the full-scale war began in 2022, proposing a face-to-face meeting between the two leaders to negotiate an end to this war. Now, this letter does include criticism towards Putin's time in power, 26 years in power, where it says half of it was spent waging war against Ukraine. And Zelensky writes that, quote, those years could have looked very different. Now, the letter also includes specific reasons as to why this war should end. And Zelensky says at some point that, at one point in the letter, even speaking on behalf of the Russian people that they do not like this war and the negative consequences that it has brought back to Russia. He says that they do not like the Ukrainian drones and missiles. They do not like the rising prices, the gasoline shortages, the Russian president's plan to mobilize more soldiers onto the battlefield. And finally, he writes that they do not like that there is no end in sight to this war. Now, this letter does come at a time where Ukraine is gaining the upper hand in this conflict, where essentially Ukrainian long-range drone technology has allowed Kyiv to carry out deeper and more frequent strikes against Russian energy infrastructure, for example, which has at this point taken out about 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity. This has really hurt the country's economy. Russia and Ukraine have each exchanged 185 prisoners of war. The Russian Defense Ministry said it handed over 185 Ukrainian captives to Kyiv and received the same number of Russian prisoners in return. The Russian servicemen will be transferred home after receiving psychological and medical care in Belarus. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also announced the return of 185 soldiers and 1 civilian to Ukraine on the same day. The exchange is part of a U.S.-mediated agreement reached by the two sides in May to hand over 1,000 prisoners each.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The death toll from the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo has risen to 82, with 452 cases confirmed. The DRC Health Ministry says 71 new confirmed cases were reported on Thursday alone, including 21 deaths. A total of 258 patients are in isolation or hospital care, while 8 people have recovered. Health authorities are struggling to contain the virus as they face a lack of standardized treatment capacity, weak contact tracing, shortages of essential medicines, and inadequate infection prevention supplies. The United Nations also warns that the violence in the DRC has further complicated humanitarian operations.
Already, the humanitarian work that we do there is extremely challenging. When you add Ebola to it, it makes our work even more complicated, and it makes the response to the insecurity makes the response to the disease that much more complicated.
The major airport in the DRC's Ituri province has resumed operations after a 10-day closure due to the Ebola outbreak. The reopening of the Bunia airport comes as authorities impose health protocols to resume flights safely. Inak Sikolai has this report for us.
Engines are roaring again, making the return of operations at one of Ituri province's most important transport hubs. For days, the airport remained closed as health authorities worked to contain the threat posed by Ebola. Now, passengers have been cleared to return, but so too are strict health protocols designed to curtail the virus from spreading beyond the outbreak zone. From now on, every arrival and departure will be closely monitored and every traveler thoroughly screened. Officials say the airport's reopening reflects a delicate balance, protecting lives while keeping a vital economic lifeline open.
We want to drive the Ebola epidemic out of our country. That is why we are determined to break the chain of infection. That is why you see these measures being implemented at our posts by our superiors. We have put measures in place for travelers. We do not want a traveler to turn up at the airport and say they are infected.
Across the terminal, the signs of this new normal are impossible to miss. Hand-washing stations are strategically placed. Posters remind travelers of the dangers of infection.
Upon arrival, you automatically wash your hands. There are also posters to raise awareness about hand washing. So you see, the work is ongoing, and we are with our young engineers and colleagues to strengthen these measures.
For health officials, keeping the airport open is not just about travel. It is about sustaining commerce, preserving livelihoods, and maintaining a critical connection for communities that depend heavily on air transport.